So now I would like to welcome Marilyn McPhee to our storytelling swap. It's so nice of you to participate with us. Um, I can't tell you how delighted I am to have Marilyn because I've never heard her. I've never heard her tell a story. I didn't know who she was really. And Liz said, "What is wrong with you? You haven't heard Marilyn McPhee." So I have had the most delightful week because I went to YouTube and I have been listening to Marilyn almost every day. And I get to hear her stories, and I really recommend that you do the same. Tomorrow, go to YouTube and let Marilyn into your house. You will just absolutely love it. And I want you to pay a particular attention to her TED Talk because I have found it so inspirational, um, telling where stories came from, why stories are so important, and the intellectual properties of stories. And so it gives me such a thrill to invite this stranger to come and tell for you because I know you're going to be delighted. Marilyn McPhee, go ahead.
Thank you, Sally, for that very generous introduction. I do appreciate it, and it's lovely to be with all of you. I have to say, wish I were there somewhere with you in person. Wouldn't that be nice? But I love the access that Zoom gives us to people that we don't know otherwise, and that people that we might not hear otherwise. Well, I want to tell you a couple of stories. The first one is one that Liz heard before, and she asked me to tell you about, and perhaps it's particularly appropriate with Mother's Day coming up. I am a fan of genealogy, and so I decided to tell stories of my matrilineal history with a Russian nesting doll. And I had to get a new one because I had to get lots of dolls. But I want to start the story with Jane Field. Jane Field was born in 1795 in Willingham, Lincolnshire, England. And we don't know very much about her young life, but when she was 20, she married a man named Richard Carlisle. And he had worked at the lace mills in Nottingham and then later for a very rich man as a gamekeeper. And together, the two of them had 11 children, including a set of triplets, which were very, very unusual in that time. And Queen Victoria actually sent them her congratulations and a sum of money. But in 1851, they decided to come to America. So in Liverpool, they boarded the ship. What was the name of the ship? I can't remember now. And they came to New Orleans. And then they boarded the ship that I do remember the name of. It was a steamer that came up the Mississippi River, Andrew Scott. And they stopped in St. Louis, where they knew they would have to spend some time getting together the things they would need to come west. Oxen and a covered wagon and all the supplies. They didn't know what they would need, but they were there for about a year. And while they were there, Jane did some laundry for some friends who were not feeling well. As it turned out, the friends had cholera, and Jane caught cholera, died at the age of 55, and was buried along the banks of the river. So the next person in this line is Jane's daughter, her second child, not one of the triplets, but this is Mary Carlisle. And it was because of Mary that the family was actually able to come to America. Mary worked for a rich woman. She was in service, and she was also engaged to be married. But when the family decided to come to America, her fiance broke off the engagement. Well, Mary had been saving for her wedding, and so she had almost a year's worth of salary saved for that. And then not long after the decision to come to America, the rich woman she worked for died. And in her will, she left Mary a year's salary. And that was enough to bring the entire family to America. After her mother died in St. Louis, the whole family stayed there for about a year while they got everything organized to come west. But when the family set out, Mary didn't come with them, at least not right away, because in St. Louis, she'd met a man named John James and they were married. But soon they did set out for the west along with a wagon train. Sadly, not far into the journey, her husband contracted cholera and died. But Mary came west without him, and she settled in a little town in what was then the Utah Territory, a town of Alpine. And there she met a man named James Healy, who was also an immigrant from England. He was a strong man and a hard worker, although he always walked with a limp as a result of an accident when he was a very young child working in the coal mines in England. And together, they homesteaded some land. They built their first house, which was a log cabin with a sod roof, and their first bed that was a wagon bed, and the mattress was straw. But they worked very, very hard. And Mary Carlisle had 15 children. Oh no, wait, that's wrong. That's the next person. Mary had 6 children. And she was very, very well educated for her time. And people said that they didn't often, not everybody, especially the women, not everybody was literate. But Mary made it a point to acquire newspapers and books, and she would take them to friends' houses, and then she would read to them from her books and newspapers by the light of a tallow candle, which she made herself. Well, Mary's second child was Lizzie Healy, and Lizzie was the first in this line that was born in America. She was born in Alpine, Utah, and she was born to a family that had become prosperous through hard work, although they were still struggling and had to work hard. When she was a cook at a sawmill, she met a man whose name was Jacob Beck. He was an immigrant from Denmark. He had crossed the plains, mostly on foot, when he was 14 years old. And together, the two of them set up housekeeping. Jacob built their first house. He was known as Farmer Beck, and he built the house with the help of his 2 brothers, who were known as Carpenter Beck and Mason Beck. So they were very good at building houses. And in time, they added to the house, and it became quite a show place. They had herds, they had other livestock, they had crops, and they worked really hard. And as I said, became prosperous. And her husband, one of his favorite things to do was on holidays, he would gather up their children, 15 of them, gather up their children and any of the other neighbor children and take them out and treat them to ice cream cones. So that was Lizzie Healy. And the 5th of those 15 children was my grandmother. Her name was Amanda Elizabeth Beck. And she enjoyed a good life in this small town in Utah Territory. And their family had the very first piano in the valley. She learned to work hard, but she also valued education. And she went to college at what was then Brigham Young Academy, where she majored in elocution and music. And sometimes I think of her as one of my storytelling foremothers in a way, because she was very well educated. But she met and married a man named J. Earl Whiteley. And when she got married, she thought she had everything she'd always wanted. He was handsome with lots of dark, curly hair. And she was particularly happy that he was a bookkeeper in town at a bank. And so when they married, she imagined herself living in town for the rest of her life. She'd often liked going to town with her parents, who would take her to buy hats and things like that. But not long after they were married, Earl took a job in a little town in southern Idaho. Just for a year, he said, just for a year. It lasted 61 years. And Amanda became the wife of, yes, a farmer. And she struggled and was poor for most of her life. She and her husband homesteaded 160 acres, and they grew wheat and they had chickens, and Amanda churned her own butter and canned fruit and pickles, and they raised turkeys, and she worked really, really hard. She went to college at Brigham Young University, where she majored, as I said, in elocution. And even until she was 90, she would often play the piano and recite poetry for friends and children and grandchildren. She had 9 children, and the third of those was my mother, and her name was Alice Beth. She was named after her 2 grandmothers, and she was born in a 1-room rock house out on that homestead. How on earth did she ever do it. The house was built out of rock that her father had quarried, and he built the house himself. They struggled. And then the big moments in their life was when they got a Ringer washing machine, and when they got a car finally, and when they got a piano that was later repossessed when they fell on hard times. But Alice Beth went off to college as well, where she majored in secondary education and music. She taught high school for a few years, and then she began to teach business machines at a business college in Salt Lake City. And it was there that she met her roommate's brother, Robert Ashby, who had grown up in Utah, but was then back in Boston, Massachusetts, where he worked during the Second World War at MIT at the radiation labs developing radar. And so Alice Beth moved back to Boston with him, where many of their ancestors had come from. And it was finally in Boston that she developed a taste for china and crystal and silver, and she finally had enough money to indulge herself in some of those pretty things. Well, after the war was over, they stayed in Boston for a while, and that's where their first child was born. And then, lured by the promise of the burgeoning aerospace industry, oh, yes, I understand tonight we're talking about rockets. So they moved to Southern California, where her husband began to work in the aerospace industry. And they had a son and another daughter. And Alice Beth was known for being a great entertainer and a great friend. And she died at the age of 90. Her first child, the one that was born in Boston, where so many ancestors, including a few suspected witches, came from, was me, Marilyn Ashby. And I grew up in Pasadena, California, near the mountains that my parents moved to because it reminded them of their beloved Rockies. Well, I had what I thought of as, and think of now as being a very typical 50s, 60s childhood: piano lessons, Girl Scouts, dancing lessons, things like that. And when I went off to college, to the alma mater of my mother and grandmother and great grandmother, where I majored in English and French and minored in history and German. But when I came back to Pasadena, I met a man named Joseph Craig McPhee. We had been at college at the same time, some of the same years, but never met there. We married and stayed in the Pasadena area for a few years, and then moved to San Diego, California, where we live now. We had 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl. And that one girl was Elizabeth McPhee. Elizabeth had a childhood that was pretty much like mine: Girl Scouts, piano lessons, dancing lessons. But unlike me, she learned to play the flute and the oboe. When she went off to college, she majored in art and music and met a man named Sean Hyatt. They both spoke Spanish because they had lived in South America for a few years. And when they finished up their education in Utah, they moved to Ithaca, New York, and then to, it keeps coming back in the family, Boston, Massachusetts, and then finally to Manhattan Beach, where they live now. And they have 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. And Elizabeth's one girl, her name is Jane. Jane is 10 years old now. She loves dressing up, she loves dancing, and she loves friends. And I love to tell this story because it begins with Jane Field, and it ends with Jane Hyatt. And I think that those are beautiful bookends to a matriarchal history. So that's that story. And I would urge you to do something like that for your own family. You know, it just touches my heart to be able to remember these wonderful women. So often the genealogy goes up at the top, the patriarchal line, but I like to go through the matriarchal line. Well, the second story I want to tell you is a folk tale, and it is a folk tale that comes from Russia. And as somebody mentioned before the program started, we love the Russian people and we love the Russian stories. We don't always love their leaders. But this is a story that happened a long, long, long time ago when there was a czar and he was rich and powerful. And is also the story of an archer an archer who had a horse, but such horses do not exist these days. These are very powerful horses, and it is said that they are sleeping beneath the earth. And in the last days, when the earth's very existence hangs in the balance, those powerful horses will emerge from where they have lain for hundreds and thousands of years, and they'll save the world. But that's a different story for a different time. This archer, his name was Ivan, and he was riding through the forest one day on his horse. And it was a beautiful spring day. The sun was shining. The sky was blue. There were white, puffy clouds. There was a gentle breeze. The little animals were frolicking in the underbrush. The birds were singing. Oh, wait, the birds were not singing. There were no birds singing. There was nary a tweet in that part of the forest. And that was odd because birds should have been singing on a day like that. Ivan noticed it and he thought to himself, well, the only reason for the bird's silence is if the great and magnificent Firebird has just been here. And sure enough, as he turned around the bend in the path, he saw on the ground a feather, a single feather that shone and gleamed in the sunlight as though it were made of pure gold, which in fact it was. So he dismounted and he went to pick up the feather when the horse spoke, and the horse said, "Drop that feather, Ivan." He said, "Why?" He said, "It will give you no joy." I said, "No, I'm going to take the feather. It is beautiful. It is unique. It is valuable. I'm going to take it to the Tsar. The Tsar will love it. Nobody else has something like this. He will likely reward me." "I advise against it," said the horse. But Ivan didn't listen to his horse. Who listens to horses? A horse is a horse, of course, of course. He didn't listen to the horse. He picked up the feather. He took it to the Tsar's palace. And when the Tsar saw it, his eyes widened with delight, and then they narrowed with greed. And he said, "How dare you dishonor me in such a way?" "No dishonor, your majesty," said Ivan. "If you could bring me one feather, surely you can bring me the entire bird, and this I command you to do. In fact, if you do not do as I command, how shall I put this? Your head shall soon not be acquainted with your body." "Oh," thought Ivan. So he went out to the stable, and the horse said, "So how'd that go for you, Ivan?" He said, "I'm commanded to get the whole bird. And this is the worst." And the horse said, "No, it's not the worst, but the worst may yet come. But go back in and tell the Tsar that you need for 100 of his servants to scatter 100 bags of maize in the nearby field at midnight." This he did. And sure enough, at midnight, there were 100 men scattering 100 bags of maize. And just before dawn, Ivan arrived on his horse. He climbed up in a tree, and the horse began to meander through the field, nibbling on grass. But just before the rosy fingers of dawn showed their rosy little fingertips, there was a whoosh, and here it came, the Firebird, magnificent, red and gold and purple and silver. And it landed in the field and began to eat the grain. The horse began to meander ever closer, and finally, in a swift move, the horse brought its hoof down on the outstretched wing of the Firebird, pinning it to the ground. And then Ivan jumped down out of the tree and tied up the Firebird with a stout rope that he'd brought for that very purpose. They returned to the Tsar's palace. And when the Tsar saw the magnificent Firebird, his eyes opened with delight, and then they narrowed with greed. He said, "If you can do that, then you can bring me the woman that I have determined I want for my wife, and that is Vasilisa the Beautiful." "And where would I find her?" said Ivan. "Well, you will find her in the thrice ninth kingdom, in the thrice 10th tsardom, in the land of Never. Come back with her, or your head will no longer—" "I think I know that part," said Ivan. He went back out to the stables and he said, "Oh no, this is the worst. I've got to get this girl for him." "Oh, this is not the worst," said the horse, "and yet the worst may come. But go back in and tell him to give you a golden tent with silver walls and silver hangings and enough food and beverage for a feast." This Ivan did, and soon he and the horse were on their way to get Vasilisa. It was a long way, but they went quickly because, of course, a horse like this, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a mighty locomotive. I don't know about leaping buildings, but they were there quickly. And there Ivan looked out on the lake, and there he saw a beautiful woman in a golden rowboat with silver oars. She was rowing, singing a little song, row, row, row your boat. She was a feast for the eyes, but he couldn't stop to gaze because he had to pitch a tent and arrange an actual feast. Well, finally, when Vasilisa came to the shore, she saw a golden tent there, and she was pretty sure it hadn't been there when she started out that morning. But peeking in the tent, she saw, oh, a magnificent feast of food and drink, and a rather handsome young man lounging on cushions, eating what, peeled grapes or something. Oh, hi, said Ivan. I've been expecting you. I bet you're hungry and thirsty after that workout. She said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. I was going to make myself a whey protein shake, but this looks a lot better. And so the two began eating and drinking and eating and drinking. And after a bit, Vasilisa said, even though it's only noon, my eyelids feel as heavy as if it were midnight. And just like that, she fell asleep. Well, now, some men could have taken advantage. We know this is true. But Ivan, our hero, he wasn't one of those. He simply picked her up gently, put her on the horse, and took her back to the Tsar's palace. When the Tsar saw the beautiful Vasilisa, wasn't he happy? And the whole place had been prepared for a celebration. There were streamers, there was confetti. He said, cue the trumpets and the wedding march. And with all that racket, Vasilisa woke up. She said, where am I? And what are we doing? And the Tsar said, oh, you're here for the wedding. She said, oh, I love weddings. Who's getting married? He said, you and me. She said, oh, no, I can't marry you. He said, oh, yes, you can. And yes, you will. She said, oh, I mean, I can't marry you unless I have my wedding dress. He said, oh, no problem. We've got designers and couturiers around here. They'll whip you up something simply fab. She said, oh, no, I've already picked out the dress. I said yes to the dress, and I must have it or I cannot be married. So the Tsar went to his go-to guy, Ivan, of course, and said, get the dress or your head. He said, yeah, I know. So he set off with the horse, who said, oh, Ivan, this is not going well. He said, yeah, I know, this is the worst. But the horse said, not the worst, but yet the worst may be coming. Well, they arrived at the place where the blue sky and the blue water met the golden sand. And there Ivan dismounted and the horse began to walk down the sands until he came to a lobster. But this was no ordinary lobster. It was a very large lobster. It was the giant of lobsters. It was the king of lobsters. It was the Tsar of lobsters. And in what had become a signature move, the horse immediately stomped on the lobster's tail. The lobster screamed, which if you've ever cooked a live lobster, you know they can do, and said, let me go. He said, no, I just need for you to get this dress. It's in a golden casket, apparently underneath a rock at the bottom of the lake. Yeah, let me go. I'll get it. No, we're not letting you go. You got to get the dress in any case. So the lobster called out, and soon the whole place was roiling and teeming with lobsters. And the Tsar lobster explained what he needed, and his hench lobsters were immediately at work. They brought back the golden casket with the dress, and whoosh, they were back at the Tsar's palace, where Vasilisa slipped into a nearby dressing room, slipped into the dress, and she looked more beautiful than ever. And the Tsar said, resume the wedding march. And Vasilisa said, oh, no, wait. I can't actually marry you. What? Until the man who brought me here does penance by leaping into a pot of boiling water. Ivan was surprised. He wasn't expecting that, but the Tsar was not unhappy. He'd seen the looks that passed between Ivan and Vasilisa, and so he commanded a cauldron to be brought and filled with water with a fire underneath, and then they watched the pot to see if it would boil, which, as you know, it takes a long time. In the meantime, Ivan said, can I at least go out and say goodbye to my horse? He said, sure, go ahead. Went out and he said, oh, you won't believe what's going to happen now. He explained it all. He said, this is the worst. You could be right, said the horse. So who is it who ordered this? He said, well, that's the weirdest thing. It was Vasilisa herself, and I thought she liked me. Oh, in that case, what, said Ivan, have you got an idea how I can escape? Well, I have a suggestion, said the horse. Let's hear it. So when the Tsar's servants come and grab you to throw you in the pot, push them away, yes, and run and jump into the pot of your own volition. That's your big idea? Best I could do. Good luck. Well, Ivan went back into the throne room, and sure enough, the pot was boiling. And the servants came to grab him, but he pushed them away. Well, Vasilisa said, I'm not sure it's boiling. I really need to check personally. So she walked over, she passed her hand through the steam, and some people say they saw something fall from her hand, but I don't think we can verify that. At any rate, Ivan began to run. He leapt into the pot of boiling water. He sank beneath the surface, and when he came up, he was as good as new, actually better than new. His hair was thicker, his eyes were bluer, his muscles were musclier. He looked great, which of course Vasilisa noticed. And so did the Tsar, who said, if it's good for him, it's good for me. So the Tsar ran and leapt into the pot of boiling water, and of course was boiled to death. Well, they buried the Tsar, but then there'd been all of those extensive wedding preparations. If you've ever been part of a wedding, you know what that can be like, and it seemed a shame to waste them. And so Ivan and Vasilisa were married. They became Tsar and Tsarevna. They ruled wisely and long and well. And as for the horse, well, he spent the rest of his days in a golden stable, a reward for being the one who had accomplished everything in the story. And that is the story of the Firebird.
Thank you.
Thanks for
That's
listening.
great.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. Thank you for sharing your time with us, your wonderful stories. So well told, so exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you.
Well, thank you. And I am going to, let's see. I got so involved in the story, I forgot to do all this pinning stuff. So our next speaker is Beverly Schwartz, and she's on East Coast time. Let's find her in this, there she is. And I'm going to add you on the spotlight. When Beverly's answer to my question about why you tell stories was, I tell stories to try to make people smile and laugh. I hope to make listeners think about how they can make a difference in the world and open up possibilities so they can make the world a better place. So, Beverly, I hope you can feel better on that.
That's why I've been doing it, so I can talk, you know?
All right. Thank
See
you.
see the black and blue? Okay. First of all, Marilyn, I truly enjoyed how you tell your stories, and your stories were terrific. I really, really enjoyed them. Thank you for making me happy. Okay. In 1985, the state of New York said that from then in the future, third graders were going to have to do hands-on science stations every year at the end of the year to see they really learned their science. I knew how to read and I knew how to discuss with the kids, but that's all I did. I said, oh my God, what am I going to do next year? I don't want to get fired because my kids didn't pass the New York State Museum in the New York State tests. Well, I had taken a course at RPI for teachers about architecture, and I learned so much, and we made a city out of sugar cubes. So I walked over at the end of the day, miserable, and I saw a sign which said a physics demonstration, all are welcome. So I was welcome. So I walked in and I saw her doing electricity and magnetism and levers and pulleys and a static electricity machine. And I looked at my curriculum that I was supposed to teach and go, that's some of it. So I walked in and I said, I need help. Can you help me? I went down and talked to the professor, the demonstrator, after the, show. They said, yeah, we'll get some students, some professors, and let's take a listen at this curriculum and sit down and talk to you. And we decided we'd have a collaborative partnership that year with the students and the physics department. And we would bring in demonstrations, break the kids up and teach them what the curriculum said. And then I went on to the human body. I went on to geology. I went to every single department at RPI that could help me, and they all helped me. Even the Albany Medical College helped me by sending medical students to me. I had called the project Learn Tech in the beginning, but I was teaching now science and technology and engineering and math, and I was making it into one big program. Nothing was taught separately. And I called it STEM. I changed the name to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I was the one who coined the word STEM, and I was the one in the world with the very first STEM program. Well, the next year, more teachers wanted to get involved. The third and the fifth had to do the science test, supposedly. And they said, oh, can we get these people in? Because they were just like me. They had never done hands-on science and stuff. And it was spreading in my school. And I did some publicity. And the state called me and said, can we come in and see this program? I mean, this is really interesting. Nobody really does a lot of hands-on, and the state really is pushing it. I said, sure, come on in. And they loved it. And RPI professors and were bringing people in to show. And even my college from Sage came, that I graduated in Troy, and they came to see it. Well, when we were doing all of this in the very beginning, my superintendent called me in. I thought, oh no, he's probably going to fire me or tell me to stop the program I'm doing. And he had said, Bev, you know, this program is something that more people around our state could really know, or even the US. I want you to apply to be the first astronaut teacher to go up in space. Here's the application. If you need anything, let me know. I want you to do it. And I had brought it home, and it was on my table, and I looked at it. A week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by. For some reason, my stomach said no. And I said, what's happening, Beth? You're usually very assertive. Bottom line was, I didn't want to die in space. So I never did it, never told anybody, kept my mouth shut. And I continued with my program. Now, we all know that Christy McAuliffe was chosen out of 10,000 teachers from New Hampshire to be the first science teacher to go up into space. And in 60 seconds after the blast off, it exploded and all perished. I was watching it the day it happened. And I was like, my God, my instincts were right. I would have died if that was me. But now I've been 5 years into the program of STEM. And the state comes in and gives me an application for the 1990 Christy McAuliffe Award, which was an annual award to honor Christy McAuliffe of new innovative programs. Now, STEM was only at that point in the Troy School District. I applied, got a letter, and I got it. I said, oh, holy mackerel. I can now maybe tell people nationally about my program. They said, an astronaut's coming to your school to visit and to congratulate you. And you will be sent down to NASA and Kennedy Space Center in Florida for an award ceremony. And he came to school, and oh, it was so exciting. And then we blasted off rocket ships in the back of the school in honor of Christy McAuliffe. And he said to me before he left, Bev, I'm glad I met you, because I was looking for someone to do me a favor at the awards ceremony. I'll meet you there, and I hope you don't mind, but I think you'll enjoy what I'm going to do. So he never told me. I went down, and I walk in, and there's Dave. He went to RPI too, which was really fun, that astronaut that I had been working with his alumni college. And he said, Bev, I have a seat next to me at my table. Come on, I want to meet you, introduce you to someone. And he brings me over. This little short woman with gray hair is sitting at the table. And he said, Grace, I'd like you to meet Beverly Schwartz, one of the Christy McAuliffe Fellows that won the award. Bev, this is Grace, Christy McAuliffe's mother. This is the very first time that she's here since her daughter passed away. We both looked at each other. I said, oh my God, what is she feeling on this day? And she was so sophisticated and nice. And oh, it's so nice to meet you. And I've heard about your program. It's so exciting. And it's going to be really disseminated well over the US. They're going to love it once they learn about it. And we sat down and we had a nice lunch. We never talked about her daughter. We talked about her grandchildren and other things that she had been doing with a local college in Massachusetts to honor her daughter. And then after the award ceremony, David, an astronaut, said to me, "And Grace, I have a surprise. I have special permission to take you at the back end of Kennedy Space Center where we don't allow people to go, only VIPs. Would you like to come for the tour?" Oh, I said, "I'd love it." And she said, "Sure." So off we went in a van. Now, we went in all different places and it was interesting. But near the end, something funny we saw that you might enjoy listening to. There was an igloo. It was white and with windows going around and rocket ships going around the igloo. And he said, this was the first place that we started blasting off rockets to test them to see if they would work and what would happen if we did different things with them. And when rocket ships go up, he said, fuel always comes down. And even to today, they allow you only 15 minutes to get out of that area. There's a big loudspeaker. Leave immediately. You have 15 minutes before the fuel arrives. And they have buses and everything dragging people out because I was there to see a rocket ship. So I saw that. And in those days, when they were just starting, they didn't know how long it was going to take. So they had to stay in the building after a rocket ship blasted off for 48 hours. Oh, by the way, you see, this is a women's room and a men's room. Either of you have to go to the bathroom? No. Well, notice where the bathrooms are. Once you get into the igloo, the door is locked for 48 hours once they blasted off the rocket ship. Where were the bathrooms? Outside the locked door. They had to make do.
Oh,
Engineers designed it. Now, he said the other thing in those days is they had extension cords from the igloo, which was the control tower to blast it off, and it would lead to the rocket ships. And they had it called Squirrel Man because they had a lot of squirrels outside. And the squirrels sometimes would loosen up the extension cords leading to the rocket ship. One day they were blasting off 30, 38, 29, 27, 26. And all of a sudden, a couple of people said, "Squirrel Man!" The man jumped out of his seat, ran and connected all the things, ran back to the igloo, got the door closed before they automatically locked, and the rocket ship blasted off. That was modern technology. Well, he said, there's only now one more thing to see. I have gotten special permission for us to go and stand on the launch pad where Christmas McCulloch's blasted off in her rocket ship. I looked at Grace. She had tightened up, with her shoulders. I can see in her eyes, oh no. We got in the car. She was quiet. And the astronaut Dave said, well, you see these railroad tracks right next to us? That's where they take the rocket ship and they take it to put onto the launch pad. Oh, and he was talking about other things. And then we got to the launch pad. There was a big cement path going up. It was a little breezy and chilly on the bottom, but as we walked up the path, it got windier and colder until we finally got on the launch pad. And then there, the three of us stood. We all looked up. There's a window that looks up into the space of this craft that when you sit there, you're looking outside and up. And as I looked up, I said, this would have been the last thing I saw if I was Christy McCall and had been selected to be the first teacher astronaut in space. And I looked at Grace. She was getting teary-eyed and a few tears. You can see her, she was holding on to herself and looking up, and her hair was blowing in the wind. I said, Grace, would you like some time alone up here? She couldn't speak. She just went. I said, look, we'll meet you down at the end of the ramp. Take your time. Take all the time you need. We walked down. And the astronaut Dave went back to the car. And I turned around. Maybe this is why Dave had picked me, because he knew he was going to do this. And as I looked up at Grace, I saw her talking to her daughter, wiping her tears, going like this. And I think she was saying goodbye, or she was saying what she had wanted to say if she had a chance. Finally, she turned around and started walking down. And she walked about halfway down the ramp. And she turned around and she threw a kiss. And then she started walking towards me. And she was staring into my eyes. It scared me. Was she okay? And then she got real close. And then she gave me the biggest mother hug you could have ever imagined. And as she slowly released herself, I reached out and we took hands. And we walked away in silence. She had finally said goodbye to her daughter. It was a moment in time. Thank you.
Mm.
Wow. Ah, I got chills. I got chills. That was amazing. Thank
It's a
you.
true story.
Ah, that is so amazing. All right. Well, I get so absorbed, and then I have to do technical things. All right. Our next speaker is Donna Mickelson. And Donna's answer to my question about why you tell stories, it was I tell stories because I'm a storytelling junkie. I see the world through the lens of stories. I love to listen and I want to be a part of the picture. And now you're a part of this picture, and I will step out of your way and let you move ahead here. Thank you so much.
I won the door prize. I hope you're ready for a short, upbeat story. I won the door prize when they were giving out sons-in-law. Travis is sweet, smart, savvy about money, loves my daughter, even likes me. And lately, he's even been getting handy, having figured out how to fix a wall heater and the toilet. Travis works as a concierge, and he is unfailingly polite and attentive in social situations. Travis and my daughter Megan live in a house in San Rafael that I inherited from my mother. Typically, Megan comes over to Berkeley, where I live, on a Saturday and spends a few hours with me, helping and hanging out. And once a month, she'll bring the ranch out. Well, in late February, she forgot to bring the check. So she decided to put it in the mail. She found a really cute card that she could send along with it. And for security's sake, walked to a mailbox instead of leaving it with her out for her carrier. Days went by, no check arrived. At first we thought it was slow mail. Then by the next weekend, we figured it had been lost in the mail. So Travis wrote another check. Megan brought it over. I deposited it. And a few days later, I got a text message from Travis saying, please check your account because it looks like you cashed both checks. Well, I checked and I hadn't. I'd only ever seen one check and I had cashed it. So I suggested he look at his account. And when he did, it turned out that someone had done an incredibly clumsy forgery, not of my name, the person the check was written to, but of his name, the person who wrote the check. Evidently, someone had gone, as they say, fishing in the mailbox with a straightened coat hanger and some chewing gum, and someone had cashed it, had honored it. Well, as it turned out, but we all bank at the same credit union here in Berkeley, and as it turned out, the next time the credit union was going to be open was the first of Travis's 2 days off. So he walks in, goes up to the teller, and says that he needs to speak to the manager because a crime has been committed and it needs to be made right. And the teller, who's been there a long time, and Travis knew that, he said, well, the manager is out all day in meetings. Can I help you? And Travis said, well, he pulled out the check, or copy of the check, with this very clumsy forgery of his name, and said, somebody made a huge mistake and it needs to be made right. And the teller looked at the check, copy of the check, and said, well, you're going to have to fill out a form. Travis said, that's fine, no problem. And it's going to take time because we're going to have to investigate how this got cashed. And it's going to take a good deal of time. And Travis said, well, you certainly are going to have to do an investigation if you don't want this kind of thing to keep happening. But no, the investigation does not come first. What comes first is I'm the innocent victim here. Someone at the credit union made a huge mistake, and the credit union needs to make it right. Well, meanwhile, there's a line of people because this is taking longer than a usual transaction. People are shifting from foot to foot, eyes are rolling, and the teller decides that you probably better make some kind of a change here. So he moves Travis away from the teller window to a semi-private cubicle. And then he says, well, one other thing that's going to happen is that Donna is going to have to come in here and sign a notarized document that she didn't cash the check. Can you call her and get her to do that? And Travis says, well, she's at home. She's 1 week out from a total knee replacement, working very hard on her recovery, but I'm sure she could spare a few minutes if you want to come on over and have her sign a document that says she didn't forge my name. Well, that was a dead end. So by now, the line was even longer because they're down a teller. And Travis says to the teller, you know, I have all day. I'm perfectly happy to stay here until this is resolved. Perhaps you could text the manager and she could come out and do something about it. Well, meanwhile, there was someone else who had a little more authority than the teller, who had heard much of this dialogue and could see what was going on. Some people were actually listening to this and, in my opinion, getting a clinic on how to deal with a situation like this. Anyway, this woman came over and she asked the teller to go back to serving customers. And she looked at Travis and she said, Travis, I understand what has happened here, and you're absolutely right. The money needs to go into your account, and I'm going to take personal responsibility for getting it there within 24 hours. Travis was thrilled. He said he would be happy to do that. But if the money was not back in his account within 24 hours, he would return. Well, the next morning, the money was back in his account. And I'm so glad that I'm his mother-in-law. Mother-in-law.
Oh my goodness. What a, a great guy.
That's his wife, I can confirm.
Oh. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to bring in Colleen. I'm going to add her on our spotlight. Colleen's answer to my question about why she tells stories is I tell stories to pass on the wisdom of past generations. Stories are also a good way to share your culture and to learn about other people's culture. So I think we're getting a story about a snowstorm. Is that right?
Yes, that's
All
right.
right.
I'll
Go
take
right
my
ahead.
glasses off, like
Okay.
Sally likes. So this is a story. It's about, it's a true story. And it was when I was around in junior high. My mother had an older sister who was, I had only met, this was the second time I met her. She came to visit us. They both grew up on a ranch in northeastern Wyoming on the Bitter Creek of the Powder River. When they were little, they lived there. And, but my aunt, when she grew up, they went different ways. My aunt didn't go to college. She married 3 times, and her last husband, they both worked for the post office, and they had reached Florida. And my mother had gone to college, and my dad had become a professor. So they were like culturally different, but started out the same, but went different ways. But they still loved, my mother still loved her. And so they still were very fond of each other. So she came, her husband died after several years of their retirement and playing golf in Florida and having a good time. He passed away. And then she came to visit us. And thank you, Marilyn, for your wonderful story, because I was living in Utah in Salt Lake City at the time. So we were living in Salt Lake City because my dad got a really good job at the university. And so my aunt came, and my mother, and she was, my aunt was a very active person. But my mother had to work. She was working part-time at the adult school teaching sewing to people that were on that didn't know how to sew and wanted to. I mean, well, like an adult school has. So she wasn't home oftentimes in the evening while my aunt was there. I think she was there about a month. And so my aunt, she was very active, and so she wanted to help. You know, she was always really helpful. So she did all the ironing, because people back then did ironing. And then she went into the kitchen, and the dishes were done. I was doing my homework, and then she decided, well, I'm going to make this kitchen more convenient and she moved dishes around in the cupboard. And I thought, you know, my mom is not going to like that. And she says, oh yes, she will, because this is so much more convenient than the way she had it. And so I was thinking, oh. And so my mom came home and looked at it and didn't look very happy. And then and this was close to the end of when my aunt was going to be there. So we went out and did some more things with her. And then she went back to Florida, and I said, and my mom immediately, when we got back from the airport, moved everything back the way she wanted it. And I knew my mom wouldn't want it, because see, my mom majored in home economics at the University of Wyoming. and she had grafted out on graph paper how she wanted her kitchen arranged. And so it and I knew she wouldn't want it. I says, Mom, are you upset? Did you talk to your sister about what she done? And she says, no, but I'm going to tell you this story. So when they were little girls in Wyoming, and they lived, this was way back in the teens. My mother was born in 1913, and she probably was about 6 years old at this time. And she was in first grade, and my aunt was in third grade. And they lived about a mile and a half from the one-room school. There was no busing, no phone, no cell phones, no regular phones. You know, if and so there was different customs that people did before things. And so they walked to school together, and they walked to school together. And one morning in the middle of winter, when they got to school, there was no teacher there. The stove had not been lit. And so they said, well, we better go back home because we won't, we have nothing to do here. We'll get really cold. So they started on the way home. But when they were a little ways, it started to snow. And I don't know if everyone has lived in the parts of the country where it snows and you don't know, the wind is blowing and you don't know which direction is your direction. And sometimes you can't even see that your hand at the end of your arm if you hold it out. But they said, well, and Mom says, and my mother said, she said, I wanted to sit down and rest. And my sister wouldn't let me because she's bossy. And so they walked on, and she says, I just kept getting tired and wanted to sit down. My feet were cold, and my sister wouldn't let me, and she pulled her up and said, you're going. And she shook her. She said, my sister shook me. And then they finally came to a fence, and they started off along the fence. And it ended up they had been going the wrong way around the fence, but they knew if they found the fence and then went to another fence that they could find a house somewhere. And it wasn't bad parenting because their parents knew that they had gotten to the school. There was time enough to get to the school. The teacher was supposed to be there to keep them in the school until it was safe to go home. But that didn't happen that day for some reason, and I don't think my mother ever found out that. But then after a while, my grandfather came out and found them, and he wasn't looking for them because he was making sure the cattle hadn't gotten up to the fence, and so they would freeze and not be able to eat. Because sometimes when is really windy, if the cattle get back up to a fence, it's not very good for them. They can't breathe. So he was making sure the cattle weren't up against the fence, but he found his two little girls instead and took them and saved them. And so he said, and so my mom said, if I had sat down, I would have frozen to death. So my sister saved my life, and she can be bossy. Sometimes being bossy is very good. So we're all have our gifts, and we're all going to do this together. So that's the story. And that's for Mother's Day.
Oh, that's great. So many stories about family tonight.
Yeah, and I'm glad actually, Marilyn, you sort of introduced, I mean, you put the right mood into it, like generations of women.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for
Take a
setting
little
up.
break.
We've got one more teller. Sally,
Yeah.
we've got Vicky next.
Okay.
Shall we just power through it?
All right, we can do that. We'll
All right.
end early then.
All right. I'm going to, Vicky Nest is our next speaker. Vicky says she lives in Sebastopol. I tell original stories and teach storytelling workshops. In answer to your question, I tell and listen to stories because they so quickly open our hearts and minds to the universal experience of being human. And I also tell stories because it's so fun. All right, well, I'll get out of your way and let you go ahead. Thank you very much.
Hey there. This is not a family story. This is about a big boss whose name was Wilmer. And he was round as a cue ball with hair across his head there, little tiny beady eyes, and a mouth that held on to a stogie eternally. He had a tendency to mumble without actually saying anything. The big boss would go down the aisle of the factory, poking at the air, looking over people's shoulders, and generally not being very happy. And then he'd clomp up the metal steps to his office, which was a plywood structure with two big open blind eyes of windows and a little door. And he would go in the door and the door would slam shut and you'd hear a little ticky, 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 ticky of a brass plaque that was hanging on the door. And the brass plaque said, "I don't get headaches, I give them." So every week, all his underlings would have to come up the steps, open the door, tick, 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 and sit down and tell the big boss what's going on in their world. The numbers, the due dates, the delivery problems, whatever it was, he wanted to know about it. And then when they were through, he'd grumble, mumble, and he'd be pecking at his computer. And they'd get up and they'd leave every week. Well, one week they noticed there were little hollow sugar bricks all over his big beat up wood desk. Nobody knew what to do about that. But because they were so afraid that possibly they were responsible for doing something about the sugar brick problem, and they hadn't, and there they were, that they just pretended like it wasn't happening and they ignored it. Well, the bricks kept piling up. And every week there were more bricks, more bricks, more bricks. And finally they formed a wall. And the wall got higher. And the wall got higher. And eventually it was kind of hard to see the big boss Wilmer. They could hear him back there, tick, 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 tick. And they could hear him, don't like that. But they'd give their numbers, they'd give their due dates, they'd do what they needed to do, and then they'd get out of there, slam the door, tick, 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 tick. Okay. Well, it didn't take too long before the wall got higher and higher and higher and formed a fortress that had towers with peaked roofs, and on the top were spun sugar flying dragon weather vanes that twizzled around in the intermittent air conditioning, constantly moving. And behind it was more and more silence. Some ticka ticka, some grumble. That's about it. One window with butter yellow light coming through because it was right opposite his desk lamp. And every so often, he would rise up like the frozen moon in an Arctic landscape and give somebody the stank eye before sinking back down again. Well, eventually it was totally silent. And his underlings would come in and they'd read their numbers and they'd go over their due dates and they'd go over everything that needed to be gone over and they'd wait. Nothing, not a sound, nothing. Some of the wise guys would go ahead and answer for him. "Hey, Jim, that's really good work." "Oh, thank you, sir." Silence. So they close up their folders and they grab their papers and they grab their pens and they grab their cell phones with their, pie chart showing 57% increase. Did you see? Did you see? And they just leave. And the door will close. No matter how quietly they tried, it still went tick, 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 tick. Well, everybody got used to this. You just go up the steps, you do your dog and pony show, and you go back down the steps. Well, then they got a postcard addressed to the company. And on one side of the postcard was this warm sand with 2 chairs and a beautiful umbrella and the sea crashing in on each other. And the sun was setting and it was beautiful. So they turned it around. And what it said in the back was, "Dear everybody, now I know what it means to be the richest man in the world. Love, Wilmer." What does that mean? What? No, man. So what happened was it got tacked up on the lunchroom bulletin board. And everybody proceeded to ignore it and go about their lives. Except for the HR lady who showed up and read it and thought to herself, "Now wait a minute. He doesn't make that much money. Where's he getting this? Where's he getting this money from? What do you mean, richest man in the world?" So she took it off of the bulletin board and she trooped right on over to talk to the CFO about this. He looked at it and made him very nervous. So the 2 of them went over to see the COO and talk about it. Ooh, it made him really, really nervous. Something's wrong here. What do you mean? Where's he getting this money from? How's he so rich? So then they went to see the CEO, who was very disturbed, very disturbed. So the 4 of them went and stormed the castle, and up the stairs they went. And they opened up the door. And behind the fortress, there was an empty desk. There was a coffee cup that was overflowing with sort of greeny mold. And there was a sandwich whose edges had curled up like pagoda eaves. And there was a little tiny spider weaving a little tiny web right in the corner of it. And lots of dust. So they looked into his computer and they looked into his files and everything looked normal. So then they opened up his email and that's when they found it. Lots and lots of emails from an H. Knight, somebody or another, to Wilmer, and from Wilmer back to this H. Knight person, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Oh yeah, so they opened them up and they read it. Oh yeah, they did. And they found out what the deal was. And it wasn't embezzlement. It wasn't financial fraud. It wasn't even a flimsy Ponzi scheme. It was thousands and thousands of love letters from Wilmer to Helen, back to Wilmer. And they looked at the deserted desk. And then they looked at the postcard again. And they realized it didn't say, "Hello, everybody. Now I know how to be the richest man in the world," with a sarcastic "Love, Wilmer." What it actually said was, "Hello, everybody. Now I know how to be the richest man in the world. Love, Wilmer."
Mm.
That is so good. I love your facial expressions. Oh my God. And I also remember why I don't miss working anymore. That's so good. Well, I think Sally's going to give us a little bit of a story now. Thank you. Let me just do unpinning, the spotlighting, and the pinning, and so forth. Add spotlight. Okay, there's Sally. I'm going to get myself out of the way. And Sally, do we have a story name?
We have a story. I call it The Hair Princess.
The
First of
hair-
all, again, let me say what a pleasure it is to have you all with us this evening. So lovely. Thank you for all your great stories. I really, really appreciate it. Not quite sure what we're going to do about next month. We may skip next month, but we'll see if we can put it together. So I'm going to end with this story about the Hair Princess. And it takes place in a time not so long ago in a place not so far away. A princess was born, me. The nurse put me in my daddy's arms just a few minutes after I was born, and he looked down at that little bundle and he pulled back the little cap. Oh, mother, our baby has a crown of soft curls. My princess. And he kissed me right here. Now, I don't know if my mother thought I was a princess or not, but she certainly fussed a lot about my hair. First, there were the little bows, and then there were the barrettes, and then there were the rubber bands. And finally, she braided my hair in long, long braids. And every morning there was the brushing and the combing and the braiding. And I would go to school, and my friend Jeannie would come up and grab those braids and say, get up, get up. And we would run around up the slide and run around the jungle gym and get to the classroom door. Whoa, whoa. Now, I wore these wonderful braids all the way through grammar school. But when I went to high school, I was sure that I could not wear braids. And so one day I went into the beauty parlor and with my own money, I said to the beautician, cut it. And the beautician cut my hair short like this in front and going down in the back with a point, which we called a DA, a duck's ass. That's what it meant for. That's what it meant. And that night when my father got home, he looked at me. Where is your hair? I cut it off. Where is it? It's in the garbage can. The garbage can. My father never called me princess again. But I got a new title. The day I was married, I stood at the head of the aisle with my father, my beautiful wedding dress, a tiara on my head, all that veiling. And my father looked at me and he said, my princess has become a queen. And he marched me down the aisle to meet my Hungarian husband, who certainly thought he was a king. And 9 months later, more or less, I had my first baby, a girl. And 21 months later, I had my next baby, a boy. And 21 months later, I had my next child, another boy. And the queen was very, very busy. She did not have time to do much with her hair. About in the 14th year of this reign, I was brushing my hair and I noticed that there was quite a bit of it in the brush. Didn't think too much of it. But the next day when I brushed my hair, again, there was a lot of hair in the brush. And then I looked in the mirror and I saw little patches of skin. And the following day I looked on my pillow and there was hair there. And I thought, well, what do I do? I'll call the Dowager Queen. So I called my mother. I'm losing my hair. It's just falling out in these clumps. And she said, oh, Sally, you're just doing too much. You're too stressed. Stop doing so much. Well, the queen doesn't do less, the queen does more. But within a week's time, it was so bad that I asked one of my boys for his baseball cap, and I'm wearing the baseball cap sitting at the breakfast table. And my husband looks at me, the king, he looks at me and he says, why are you wearing a baseball cap? I said, well, I'm losing my hair. And he said, well, do something about it. So I called the wizard of hair at UCLA and made an appointment and went in to see him. And he looked at my hair, and he looked at my scalp, and he said, do you have any hair on your arms? And I said, no. And he said, do you have any hair on your legs? And I said, no. And he said, do you have, and I said, no, I don't have any hair there either. And so he took out his book and he started looking down the book and he said, you have alopecia totalis. What is that? It sounds terrible. It means total hair loss. Well, will it come back? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Well, do you have a potion or a spell or something? Not really. And so I left his office, and by the time I got back to my house, you can imagine the state I was in. And I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and here was this little face with this nose and the buck teeth and no hair. And I thought, oh my God. And then I heard a little knock. I don't know where the little knock came from, but I heard this little knock. And a voice said to me, a very sweet voice said to me, you know, you're not your hair. You are not your hair. You have lots to do. The kingdom needs your help. You get out there and do it. And so I did. And what I did was I bought wigs. Oh, did I buy wigs? I had a red wig. I had long wigs. I had short wigs. But the wig that I liked the best was a synthetic wig from DuPont. You could do anything in that wig. You could swim in it. You could sleep in it. You could camp in it. It was fabulous. But it was while wearing that wig, I was sort of decrowned, as one would say. I was playing volleyball with my Girl Scouts, my senior Girl Scouts. And I went up to hit a ball, and the girl next to me went up to hit the same ball and caught her hand in my wig, and it flew over the net and landed like roadkill on the opposite side. And soon all these girls were gathered around looking at it. And finally one picked it up and said, is this yours? And I said, do you see any other bald people around here? And I slapped it down on my head. And then the questions began. Are you sick? When did you lose your hair? Will it come back? How many wigs do you have? Well, I must have 6 or 7 wigs. Oh, that's so cool. And then I became the queen of cool. One of my girls would see me shopping. One of my senior Girl Scouts would see me shopping, and she would say, oh, so cool. So I became the queen of cool. And then, surprisingly, little by little, the hair started to come back. I don't know why, but it did. Not as luxurious, not as full, but I was grateful for every single blade that came out on my head. And so, whoops, shush. And so the hair came back. I got rid of my wigs. I got rid of my hats. And then several years later, I got a new title. I went to the movies in the afternoon, and I handed the cashier, a teenage girl, my payment. And she looked at me and she said, would you like a senior citizen ticket? Senior citizen, senior citizen. How did I get that title? And I ran home and I looked into the mirror and I saw this face and this nose, senior citizen. And then I heard that little knock on the door, and a little voice said, you know, you're not your nose, you're not your wrinkles. And if you get Clairol, you won't even be your gray hair. So go out there, take yourself, and go out into the world and enjoy. And so I have. And I thank you for coming tonight and being with us. And we'll see you next week, next month. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to turn off the recording now.
Okay. And if you want to stay and chat for a little while, you're certainly welcome to do that.